Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
The day started like any other in our quaint suburban community. The sun peeked through the curtains, birds chirped outside, and the smell of fresh coffee wafted through my kitchen. That this ordinary morning would spiral into a nightmare of bureaucratic incompetence and neighborly strife. It all began with a leak, a small, innocuous drip from my ceiling that I initially dismissed as nothing more than a minor annoyance. But as days passed, that drip turned into a steady stream, and before I knew it, I was dealing with a full-blown water damage crisis. My upstairs neighbors, the Johnsons, were less than sympathetic. "Not our problem," Mr. Johnson grunted when I confronted him about the leak. "Talk to the HOA." So I did, or at least I tried to. I fired off an email to our Homeowners Association board, explaining the situation and requesting a copy of the CC&Rs, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that govern our community. I needed to know who was responsible for repairs and how to proceed with my insurance claim. Days passed, no response. I sent another email, silence. I called the property management company. "We'll get back to you," they promised. They never did. Frustration mounting, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I drove down to the public records office, a place I never thought I'd find myself on a Tuesday afternoon. The clerk behind the counter looked at me with a mix of boredom and mild interest as I explained my situation. "HOA documents? That'll be $1," she drawled, barely looking up from her computer. I gritted my teeth and handed over my credit card. $1 for something my HOA should have provided for free. But at this point, I was desperate for answers. As I flipped through the pages of the official CC&Rs, my eyes widened in disbelief. This wasn't the 4-page document our HOA had been passing off as the rules. This was a comprehensive, page legal document detailing every aspect of our community's governance. I scanned the sections on water damage and nearly choked on my own spit. According to the real CC&Rs, my upstairs neighbors were indeed responsible for the damage caused by their leak. The HOA's negligence in providing the correct documents had nearly cost me thousands in repairs. Anger bubbled up inside me. How could they be so incompetent? How many other homeowners had been misled by the sham of an HOA? I stormed into the next HOA meeting, CC&Rs in hand, ready for a confrontation. The board members sat at their table, looking more like a group of retirees at a bingo night than the governing body of our community. "Can someone explain to me," I began, my voice trembling with barely contained rage, "why our HOA has been operating with an incomplete set of CC&Rs? The room fell silent. Board members exchanged nervous glances. Finally, the president, a portly man named Frank, cleared his throat. We weren't aware there was more to it," he stammered. "Weren't aware?" I echoed incredulously. "How can you run an HOA without the full governing documents?" Frank's face reddened. "Now see here," he blustered. "We've been doing just fine with what we had. No one's complained before." "No one's complained because no one knew," I shot back. "Do you have any idea how many homeowners you've potentially screwed over with your incompetence?" The meeting devolved into chaos after that. Other homeowners, hearing the commotion, began peppering the board with questions. How long had this been going on? What else didn't they know? The board members looked like deer caught in headlights, fumbling for answers they didn't have. In the days that followed, I became a man on a mission. I went door to door, informing my neighbors about the CC&R debacle. Some were outraged, others apathetic. "What's the big deal?" One neighbor shrugged. "It's just some paperwork." But it wasn't just paperwork. It was our rights, our responsibilities, the very foundation of our community. And our HOA had been operating in willful ignorance for years. I filed a formal complaint with the state's housing department. I demanded the HOA reimburse me for the cost of obtaining the CC&Rs. I even consulted a lawyer about the possibility of a class action lawsuit on behalf of all the homeowners who had been misled. The HOA's response: radio silence. They stopped answering emails, stopped returning phone calls. It was as if they thought they could make the problem disappear by ignoring it. Meanwhile, my ceiling continued to leak. The Johnsons, emboldened by the HOA's inaction, refused to take responsibility. "Show me where it says we have to pay," Mr. Johnson sneered when I confronted him with the CC&Rs. "Right here," I said, pointing to the relevant section. In black and white, he squinted at the page, then shrugged. "That's not what the HOA told us. Not our problem." I was at my wit's end. My home was being damaged. My neighbors were hostile. And the very organization meant to protect our interests was burying its head in the sand. The situation came to a head one stormy night. The leak in my ceiling, exacerbated by the heavy rain, finally gave way. I woke to the sound of rushing water and found my bedroom flooded, my possessions floating in a murky pool. As I stood there, ankle deep in water, watching my life quite literally go down the drain, something inside me snapped. I marched upstairs, pounded on the Johnsons' door until they answered, and let loose a tirade that probably woke the entire block. "You see this?" I yelled, gesturing at my soaked pajamas. "This is what your negligence has caused. You're responsible, and by God, you're going to pay for it." Mr. Johnson, for once, looked rattled. Now, he stammered. "Let's not do anything hasty. Maybe we can work something out." But it was too late for negotiations. I was done playing nice. The next day, I filed a lawsuit against both the Johnsons and the HOA. It was time they faced the consequences of their actions, or rather, their inaction. The legal battle that followed was long and bitter. The HOA hired a slick lawyer who tried to argue that their 4-page document was sufficient for governing the community. The Johnsons claimed ignorance, saying they were just following the HOA's lead. Months dragged on. Legal fees mounted. My once peaceful home became a battleground of depositions and expert testimonies. Neighbors took sides, friendships were strained, and the sense of community we once had crumbled like the drywall in my bedroom. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. The HOA was found negligent in their duties, and the Johnsons were held responsible for the damage to my unit. But it felt like a hollow victory. The monetary compensation couldn't erase the stress and frustration of the past year. As I stood on my balcony, watching the contractors finally repair my ceiling, I couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. Yes, I had won. Yes, justice had been served. But at what cost? The community I had once loved was now fractured. Neighbors who used to greet each other warmly now averted their eyes in passing. The HOA board had resigned en masse, leaving us with an interim committee that seemed more interested in covering their own backs than in actually governing. And me? I was left with a repaired ceiling, a depleted bank account, and a bitter taste in my mouth. The American dream of homeownership had turned into a nightmare of red tape and petty feuds. As I signed the final check for the repairs, I couldn't help but wonder, was it all worth it? Had my crusade for justice actually accomplished anything in the grand scheme of things? I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of being the squeaky wheel, tired of the constant stress and anger. That night, as I lay in my newly repaired bedroom, listening to the sounds of my now quiet ceiling, I made a decision. It was time to move on. Not just from this battle, but from this place. From this community that had caused me so much grief. The next morning, I called a realtor. It was time to sell. Time to find a new home. Preferably one without an HOA. As I packed up my belongings, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of regret. This wasn't how I had imagined things would go when I first moved in. But life, I was learning, rarely goes according to plan. Sometimes you win the battle but lose the war. Sometimes the cost of being right is higher than you ever imagined. As I took one last look around my empty apartment, I sighed. It was over, but the bitter taste lingered, a reminder that sometimes there are no real winners in these petty suburban wars. Only casualties. Reading the CC&Rs should absolutely be your starting point, and the fact that the HOA didn't even have a copy on hand is mind-blowing. How can they possibly enforce rules or make informed decisions when they don't even have the full governing documents? That's not just a minor oversight. It's a glaring failure in their basic duty to manage the community effectively. It raises some serious questions about their competence and whether they've been running the HOA based on incomplete information or just making things up as they go along. Now that you've gone through the trouble of obtaining the full CC&Rs from the Public Records Office, on your own dime, no less, you're finally in a position to figure out who's truly responsible for the damage. If the CC&Rs indicate that the HOA is liable, you'd be well within your rights to demand answers about why they've been neglecting their responsibilities. It's not just about the damage. It's about their entire approach to governance. Why didn't they maintain proper records? Why did they rely on a random 4-page amendment as if it was sufficient to govern an entire community? Were they even aware they didn't have the full CC&Rs? Or did they deliberately choose to ignore them because it was easier? These are questions they need to answer, though based on their track record of dodging you, it's doubtful they'll suddenly start being forthcoming. You might also want to look into how and when amendments were made to the CC&Rs. If there were procedural changes that weren't communicated to homeowners or didn't follow the rules laid out in the original documents, like requiring a homeowner vote, they may have been acting outside their authority. But don't be surprised if you hit a wall trying to get this information. Given how they've already ghosted you, it's clear that their strategy for dealing with difficult questions is to bury their heads in the sand and hope you go away. Unfortunately for them, this negligence might just come back to bite them. With everything that's happened, it's clear that legal action has already been necessary to deal with the HOA's blatant negligence. The fact that they've failed to maintain their CC&Rs and ghosted you when you needed their help only highlights just how inept and careless they've been. Since lawyers have already been involved, it's worth continuing to press the issue of the HOA's liability, especially if the CC&Rs place any responsibility on them that they've been ignoring. If your upstairs neighbors are ultimately found responsible for the damage, the HOA's mishandling of the situation and their failure to provide the governing documents could further expose them to negligence claims. You might also demand answers from the HOA about how they decided that a 4-page amendment was enough to govern the community. Was this decision made in consultation with their own legal counsel? Or was it just laziness and an unwillingness to do the bare minimum? Their refusal to address these glaring issues in their history of dodging you only makes it more likely that they were cutting corners and hoping no one would notice. At this point, it's about holding them accountable not only for their mishandling of the current situation but also for the larger pattern of negligence that has allowed this mess to escalate. The sheer incompetence of this HOA is almost laughable, if it weren't causing you so much stress. They didn't even bother to maintain the basic governing documents required to run the community, leaving homeowners like you in the lurch when critical issues arise. And their strategy of ghosting you rather than addressing their failings is beyond unprofessional. It's negligent. Their behavior suggests they're either completely unfit to manage a community or actively trying to avoid accountability. Either way, it's not just frustrating, it's dangerous for everyone who lives there. The fact that you had to spend your own money to get the CC&Rs while the HOA continues to collect dues from homeowners is outrageous. Honestly, they shouldn't be governing anything, let alone a community.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.